please.
Yeah, Ajay Kapoor.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Dan Ackerman, the trade desk. We had the good pleasure of catching up last night, so we cheated a little bit and did some on-site prep.
We did pre-work.
Pre-work, yeah. I mean, that's what the expectation is, right?
Yeah.
I think we got to start with just your background and kind of your journey to get to GM, because it is a non-linear route to get to an auto manufacturer to marketing.
Non-traditional is probably the way to put it. Yeah. Good Indian boy that studied to go become a doctor, right? And then turn left very quickly. Entrepreneur, co-founded 4 companies, notably Get Around, peer-to-peer car sharing network. Then went to Procter, right? I was the hoodie kid that was supposed to show up and drive systemic innovation and speed, startup mentality there. Spent 5 years, did a lot of things from ad stacking, ad fraud, all the way up to Like a Girl campaign, big idea, innovation on that front. Craved owning both P&L, GM strategy, and execution. So I went to 2 mid-cap companies and then got a phone call. And it was like, hey, come back to the Metro Detroit area. I was like, never thought I would move home. And here we are. So I report into...
Boomerang back to Rock City.
Yeah. I report back into our global CMO, Deborah Wall, and lead our performance-driven marketing team. And that's comprised of 5 core pillars. All of our analytics and insights, advanced analytics, so our MDA, experimentation, MarTech stack, privacy, which is really interesting. We think it's critical from a strategy standpoint to have that within marketing, operations, data. And then I own demand gen for basically everything post-sale, right? Like, how do I drive LTV is my responsibility at the company.
I think congratulations are in order. Regained the top auto brand, auto seller in the United States.
You're reading the news at CES. Well done.
It's incredible, man. It's been such a journey with regaining that, and but it's not for lack of effort, for sure. I mean, I think what's happened there, just as an auto enthusiast and as a consumer, it's not your father's General Motors anymore. I think what Mary and Deborah and team have done, and I'm sure you've been a big part of that, is pretty incredible. I mean, it's changing the entire direction of the company. It was super interesting. We were chatting, but maybe if you could take us through a little bit of that conversation with Deborah, with Mary, what were they embarking on a few years back before you joined that really got you excited about that to join them?
Yeah, totally. 2018 made a huge investment to drive this EV future. So, Mary decided, working with the board and the broader business, that we were going to build a ground-up platform, Ultium, and really tackle EV adoption in the United States. It's fascinating. And so, very significant choices at a corporate level to kind of move out of certain areas to drive capital funding against this. And that was the genesis of this new GM and this broader transformation we're going after. And so amazing products hitting the road, that are on the road, that are coming in our all EV future that we announced 2.5 years ago at CES. And that's driving this massive stimulation across the business of, okay, let's question everything that's always been there. Let's build a best-in-world modern marketing capability, and let's drive amazing product to our eventual and aspirational consumers that we're trying to target.
Yeah, bold move at a time when ICE vehicles were high margin, EV market was sub 1%. So it's a big bet to make. Obviously, it's paying off now. It's just super exciting. When you talked about the post sale piece. And I think for many of us growing up, the transaction happened, long consideration cycle. You go and you buy a vehicle, and then keeping in touch was really service. Now the car, this was I'll borrow from what you said the other night, it's kind of become the new smartphone. Talk a little bit about that relationship with the consumer that is changing it from I made a huge purchase, and then I'll see you in 3 to 7 years.
Yeah, look, I think it got coined today in a conversation I was having. It's a smart car now, right? So it's not a smartphone, not a car. It's a smart car. Look, this thing is software defined, right? So it's app ecosystem. It's connected. It's got telemetry. It's got connectivity. It's got over-the-air updates. The overall journey and experience that customers are going to have, are having, and will have with a GM vehicle over the next 2 to 5 years is going to be transformative. And so that goes from, okay, does the car have, better advanced driving capabilities, what we call Super Cruise, 400,000 miles, hands-free driving available in a Super Cruise enabled vehicle. We're driving over-the-air updates constantly, right? Because safety is critical and core to how we bring product to market. Rear seat infotainment, right? What's that look like? I was giving the example, kid from Michigan, you drive down to Disney World, so you got your Florida drive ahead of you, got 2 kids in the back seat. You want this car to be broadly hands-free as you're on the freeway, safe, and then you want your kids entertained in the back seat so they're not punching each other, throwing things, whatever. And that's a reality. That's right in front of us. You can have that today. So these vehicles are going to be fundamentally different to what we've always experienced in our ICE vehicles. That relationship with our customer is going to fundamentally change. It's going to be ongoing, right? It's what's the next great update that can go to an individual? How do you drive premium content? How do you drive personalization at scale? And how does a customer have the configurations that they're looking for within that vehicle to make it theirs?
Yeah, you've had great, DMV registration data for a long time. You have service data, but this is a whole new frontier of a relationship with the consumer. What's the kind of mentality change within, a 100-plus-year-old auto manufacturer in starting to build that relationship with consumers? What you do with the data, how you start to bring that back into benefiting, each of the brands, the way they market, the way they communicate with consumers.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. Where the conversations I have is we got to do the fundamentals right? So we talk about all of these things that we want to do, or the industry as marketers want to do, and it's actually you got to get your first party data in order, right? In many of these companies that I've been at, GM, other places, it's all over the place. How do you centralize? How do you get that squared away? How do you drive consent and privacy against that? Okay, those are going to be fundamental and foundational as we think about, sending you an offer, hypothetically, if you had a GM vehicle, of OnStar insurance. I'm not going to go spend the money that Geico or Progressive, I already have a captive audience. I already know who you are. Let's figure out how to build value and lower your total cost of operation on that vehicle through getting you an insurance product that we run, right? So there's all these value streams, but broadly we got to make sure we have the fundamentals in place, we have consent in place, and that we can use our own channels to do work, and then, working with Trade Desk or others, getting our activation channels to really understand how do you find that right person, grow acquisition, right? So gain share, and then grow LTV. That's the game that we're trying to really forge forward with our EV future that we're building out.
Yeah, you talk about fundamentals with the day-to-day communication with the consumer. How is that? What's the journey been in terms of translating that into bringing that to bear in media activation and paid channels? I mean, you've got publishers, you have tech partners, you have agencies all involved. So your sphere of influence and control starts to dissipate as you go out. Those ripple out. What have been some of the best practices that you guys have collaborated with partners to start bringing that data to bear, both in finding consumers, but also trying to measure impact? Because I'm sure Mary and Deborah are looking for what's the impact on the business.
This comes out of our pre-work, right? It turned into a little Trade Desk conversation. But look, my philosophy on this is get upstream, collaborate early, get the smart people in a room, and work collectively with your agency and your end state partners more actively, right? Like get proximate, get after it, and figure out how to drive innovation and alpha against it. Put a measurement framework against it, have crazy ideas, experiment, limit your experimentation on like total costs or reach, and then figure out if stuff works, right? So that's always been, again, comes from my startup experience. You didn't have anything, so you had to go figure out how to make it happen. You can do that at scale at a major marketing company like General Motors, and we'll offer that up as the best practice to go after it, because it then stimulates, hypothetically, on the Trade Desk or other partners, they get excited and they start leaning in, and they're like, I got this alpha. Where's that alpha gonna go, right? Where's that beta gonna go? to a company that's willing to lean in, get stuff done, fail, and then learn from it.
But how's the approach been as if you developed it in North America and then start thinking about all of the different opportunities and challenges when you look outside of North America? Because I know that one of the big bets was to really build a beachhead here.
Yeah.
But the EV market is global for sure, and certainly in Europe and other places, there's huge adoption there. How do you think kind of 2-3 years out of, and Josh was talking about this in the previous panel, of building that framework here and then helping other regions educate them, adopt it, and start to see the benefits of it?
Yeah, the way we think about it is it's going to be different regionally. China's going to be different. Europe's going to be different. So it's really about the principles, right? Getting your principles down, getting your North Star down, and then allowing for each of those regions to go on their learning journey. It's not we're going to flip a switch in 2 years. It's do the work today for the reality that you want to create in 2 years. And so that's the conversation we're having, on my teams globally to make sure that we're driving that reality. They're just different tests that we're doing in South America versus Europe versus North America. Size and scale is different. And obviously, as new product penetration with our EVs start to roll out, it's going to start morphing how we think about go-to-market. But yeah, a lot of really interesting innovation that we're playing with. Can't tease much of it right now, but our go-to-market strategy is going to get really unique as we think about market to market and what that market actually needs from a consumer standpoint.
Well, talk about time horizon. Josh was talking before. Like these are not overnight initiatives. When you started this journey back in 2018, you started to put together, understand the landscape internally and start to think about how you start to educate and then roll this out. What was the time horizon? Is this 18 months and then we kind of check in? Is this a 5-year journey? And what are the milestones that have been important?
There are two things at GM that always get spoken about. It's ventilator speed. So U.S. government reached out to General Motors to build out ventilators during COVID, 30 days. Okay. So it demonstrated to the company when you get a very challenging project and you focus on it, you can move things. The other one we talk about is Hummer. Hummer went from a piece of paper sketch to a super truck that does 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds in less than 2 years. And so those are the demonstrations of speed we're looking for. So there's certain things that are going to be longer lead. Building a battery plant is going to take a little longer. But the idea, at least as we take that inspiration into marketing, is how do you drive fast twitch experimentation? How do you then ensure in parallel, get your quick wins, and then in parallel, understand what are your core capital intensive investments that you want to make? So as an example, from my standpoint, what my team's focused on, customer mastering, get our first party data in place, get our activation CDP, you throw whatever, 3-letter acronym against, and then what we're building basically from scratch is a privacy and enterprise privacy consent and preference management system. Because at the end of the day, cool, I got consent, I have first party data, but what I really want is zero party data that I can go do the things that a customer actually wants me to go do to build value for them, right? So those are places where we're trying to take startup mindset, things that we've demonstrated internally, and then scale it for the broader marketing team.
When you think about some of the primary communication channels that have been fundamental to auto, television has been at the core, and it's such a long consideration cycle. A lot of what you're talking about, I think, is you have like a direct path in digital channels. I mean, the experimentation, the flexibility. What's it been like internally and externally with publishers and bringing them along with you to change the way they think about partnering on television as a channel to communicate with consumers?
Yeah, so we codified our investment strategy. And there are 3 core pillars to our investment strategy. We share them openly. It's win on experience. So really where the customers live, continue to cultivate those strong experiences. And that may be own channels, it may be on a publisher, it could be wherever. Be audience obsessed, like know who you actually need to go talk to, right? And then be in culture. We need to be ingrained in culture, right? So those are the places that are really critical for us, that are our North Stars that we go back to the publishers with, and then we drive co-creation off of that, right? Like there are certain things that are going to be our tent pole. We know run the business investments. We know what those look like. It's the other section, that other piece of the pie that gets really interesting. And again, we want to make sure we were principled and had a first principle approach to it. We bank it against those three things, and then we say, have at it. What's the best idea? And let's drive a meritocracy, and let's go test and learn into it.
When you start to bring all of that data and understanding about the consumer into the market, and then you start to get the feedback loop, how did you set the expectations internally about what we're expecting to see and then what we're going to do with it? And what are some of the exciting things that you've seen, now in the kind of early returns that are making a difference in market, that are like tangible, measurable, that you could bring to a board and say, look at the impact we're making?
Yeah, no, great question, right? So managing of expectations as this thing gets built out, right? Like it's not overnight. And you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I do interesting alpha, beta experimentation that's likely like hand-run clean room to fundamentally understand, did it work, did it not work, and then tie it to registrations and understand, did I actually get a win here or not? For us, it's winning on experience and being ingrained in culture. It's integrations, it's being in movies, it's doing some of these things that are harder to actually measure, but understanding that there's value there. On the other side, it's like, okay, what are cool, really measurable, performance-driven? That's part of my title, right? Like I got to be focused on that we can go do. It's like working with Snapper, TikTok, etc., and really understanding how do you meld performance and culture and experience where customers are playing in some of these social platforms. And so, part of the strategy is playing there. Part of the strategy is being a front runner as like new inventory on OTV, CTV, ATV starts to open up, Disney Plus, Netflix, etc. Having a lot of those early conversations so we can actually test and learn, we can grow with them, and we can help those partners actually understand what that business is going to look like for them. That's really clear. And, again, we have some early wins that we're able to go back to our board, go back to key stakeholders and demonstrate we as marketers are being good stewards of our investment, and we're actually driving incrementality onto the business.
Does it always start with Chevrolet, or you have it's a big portfolio,
yeah.
And, Buick and Chevy, like they're just operating differently. Is there one brand in the portfolio, Cadillac, that is eager to be, I want to be the one that breaks ground, I want to be the test first?
I love all my CMOs equally, right? They're all experimenting differently. And they're doing different things at scale for their customer, right? A Cadillac customer is different than a Hummer customer, right? So those are the things that allow for them to then start building out what their experimentation tenets are going to look like. So yeah, Cadillac's doing some really cool stuff. I'll say GMC's doing some really cool stuff. Buick's doing some really cool stuff with like female, targeted Reese Witherspoon integrations. And then Chevy does a ton of stuff, right? You go from selling a Corvette to a Bolt EV for under $30,000. Like they have a whole gamut to hit broader US. And the big challenge, just tie on Chevy, is if you want to actually talk about EV adoption, they got to carry the bellwether weight of getting individuals, getting populations in Illinois, Iowa, other places that aren't coastal to actually consider EVs, to understand the value proposition for them as they go through this overall change that's happening in the transportation industry.
Yeah, I think anyone who came from New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, you're there. I mean, it's everywhere you look. There's an EV. But when you travel into the middle of the country and some more rural areas, you realize like an EV is like seeing a Tesla 10 years ago. I mean, it's something that is just not part of the culture there. When you get down to that level of personalization, and to say personalization at scale, but I have to imagine that that's got to be part of the proposition to start to penetrate into those kind of markets. Anything that's been an interesting project that you've worked on using that level of personalization to start to introduce that concept or the desire for EV in those markets?
No, that's an awesome question. We have a built out EV maturity model, right? So in essence, you got to think about it as new category creation. So it's not just category cannibalization of ICE, but it's actually category creation. There's a ton of different barriers on why would I adopt an EV? Does it actually charge? Do I have range anxiety? All of these things from a RTB, a reason to believe standpoint that we need to overcome. And so for us, it's really interesting. If you just look at, okay, where should we go place our next EV? Data would tell you go to California, go to the East Coast, go to the West Coast, because that's where it already exists. That actually doesn't solve the maturity question. It doesn't solve for how do you take different markets into a new maturity curve. And so we're working through some really interesting data that we have internally proprietary and then through what we've pulled together that's saying, okay, when we think about this next launch, let's do this. And then the other thing that's really interesting is we're now doing localized, in partnership with our broader multi-tier setup with our dealers, with our LMAs, Tesla learns against this. So it's like, how do we actually drive throughput on, EV messaging that resonates within particular communities that are actually effective and it's going to drive unit sales?
Yeah, well, I know this. We'll wrap it up here, but I think that's one of the most fascinating parts about the auto industry is that you have, you go from, Dan's Chevrolet in Plano, Texas, to national kind of launch and lifestyle stuff, and kind of managing across that gets pretty challenging. So the consolidation and seeing all the data has got to be helpful. I know we're the only thing in between you and cocktails, so I want to move to questions if there are any in the audience.
Adam Pyatt at Live and 10. We do some great work with your agency team that's just aces. One thing that I found fascinating with the whole EV journey, right, is it's different from the very beginning, it feels like, from a consumer, right? A lot of times you have to actually sign up to get updates or reserve your spot. How are you taking some of those models that can get the customer, get that first party data, get them involved and start messaging them right away? How can you apply that to other brands that are not EV that maybe are a little bit more traditional in nature?
Yeah, no, great question, right? I think what we've noticed through the evolution of not only EV, but we had COVID, we had semiconductor, a constrained inventory space, is the more you can start to harvest and gather interest, and it could be early, right? It could be like, I'm just curious, I want a mailer, to all the way down to like, I want to actually put hard-earned cash down to reserve a spot, is really valuable. And historically in the auto industry, we didn't. You just showed up to a dealership, you chose your color, you hopefully had the right, vehicle that you wanted at your local dealer. And now we're able to start to customize those experiences throughout. And so, yeah, we're looking to extend that to provide, again, the personalized experience from your top of funnel. I'm just thinking about purchasing a new vehicle over the next 6 to 12 months, all the way down to how are we giving tools and capabilities to our dealers to drive a more seamless purchasing experience. We're all keenly aware that isn't a fun journey, and it is one of our core focuses to work as a collaborative ecosystem with our franchisees, with our dealers, to figure out how do we make the litmus of a customer is now a seamless purchasing experience. If I can pick up my Domino's pizza and know when it's going to show up and when it's in the oven, all the way through to when it's going to show up at my door, we need to be able to provide that. So that is the evolution that the overall auto industry is going through. And I think all of those tenets expand across any and all categories that you can start to implement pretty seamlessly.
We had another question over here.
All right, this will be the last question of the day.
No pressure.
Hi, my name is Glenn from a company called Bottom Line Technology. But this is just more out of curiosity, and it probably would be a whole other session, but who do you believe wins the battle for the screen in the car? does GM and other manufacturers believe that, by allowing Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, like into the car, have you let the fox into the hen house? And how do you, extend advertising? You get so much data from the car, right? Seatbelt clicks, etc. Like, how do you win that ownership of the screen, or is it product development so it's 2 screens? Like, what's your thought on it?
Yeah, we're really excited about what software-defined vehicles a lot, right? So that now enables different experiences for our customers. Some of those things are going to be GM enabled. Some of those are going to be partner enabled. So if you guys hit the floor of CES, we did a art of the possible concept with Microsoft around in-vehicle gaming, right? So the sitting out there at Redmond, and we're like, people buy and make $40,000, $50,000 gaming rigs. And we have the hydraulics, we have the rumble seat, we have the pedals, we have all of that stuff. So if you're charging hypothetically, or you're in your garage, what's that look like? Could you be playing Gran Turismo or your game of choice? For sure. So look, I think it's going to be a collaborative ecosystem. Obviously, as the OEM, we want to understand, how do we put the customer first, and how do we protect the customer through that, while still continuing to build our own business as we think about lifetime value, cross-sell, upsell. So I think that we're early innings on what that's going to look like, and how we allot the features and functionalities that customers are looking for in a way that's accretive to all partners that are playing in that ecosystem.
That sounds more exciting than the windows opening and the lights flashing while it plays music. So I'm glad there's some innovation happening there.
All right, well,
They don't advertise, so we can say that. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you hanging out till 5 o'clock.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, AJ and Dan.